All right, it looks like it's recording. So welcome to the 2013 Global Indicators webinar. I'm going to be going over the general background of the global indicators because I know that there are some people who are new to PACS this year who will be watching this, and also some of the clarifications that we really wanted to emphasize this year because there were some common points of confusion last year, and we're hoping to get everyone on the same page this year. So, as I think most people know, that global indicators come from a need to summarize PACS work that's really very diverse across a lot of different countries and a lot of different sectors into a way that can summarize easily what we do holistically. It's difficult to assess whether or not our different projects with just their individual data are helping us meet major strategic goals, and we've really seen the global indicators come into play there in recent years. So they are something that across PACT we look at a lot. How we've landed on describing PACT's reach is through 6 indicators, one for each of PACT's impact areas and one for each of PACT's approaches. Just to briefly review what the actual indicators are, the health indicator is the number of people with improved access to health or social services. The livelihoods indicator is the number of people with increased income. The natural resources indicator, natural resources management indicator, is number of hectares under improved community management. The capacity development indicator is number of organizations with improved performance. The governance indicator is number of initiatives resulting in positive state society engagement. And the business and markets indicator is number of projects where business and markets played a positive role. So let's just briefly show you what we've done to date. And we have some pretty impressive totals across all of our projects. Health obviously is one of our more widespread ones. We have a few pockets where livelihoods have really been reporting large numbers. Natural resource management, again, has a few pockets that are particularly impressive. We do capacity development everywhere, so we have lots of large bubbles. Governance, and then business and markets. And you've all seen the report with those results in them overall. Where I want to start going into more detail is what we've done since everyone submitted their data in October of last year. The first thing we did was publicize the results. The Measuring PACS Mission report is available both on our intranet and on PACS public website. This is basically the only document right now on the new results and measurement website, the ones from 2012 and 2011. So they are publicly available documents, and we want this report to represent us externally in the best way possible, in the most accurate way possible. It's also something that we used in the balanced scorecard, and last year was the first year where we had to grapple with how to actually summarize the global indicator data into one number for the balanced scorecard, so it could be green, yellow, or red. The way we ended up deciding to do this is looking at percentage change in accomplishment from last year in each sector. So for example, if in FY11 we helped 100 people have improved access to health services, and in FY12 we helped 120 people improve their access to health services, the change was 20% in that particular sector. And then across the sector, those changes were weighted, and then we averaged them each according to their weight. So the weight for health and livelihoods was 24%, the natural resource management weight was 12%, capacity development and governance was 16%, and business and markets results were weighted 8%. These weights were chosen by the leadership team after quite a lot of discussion. Essentially what they were looking for was a compromise between an actual reflection of the sectors that got the most, where PAC does the most work, and an aspirational attempt to even it out between the sectors. So that's why, even though 12% of PAC's work isn't natural resource management, it is still represented as 12% in the weighting. I don't think that they're 100% married to these weightings, but they are planning on using them again this year. We've also asked all the country offices to set targets. And I was very pleased with how quickly people were able to respond with those targets. And people really got them in pretty much on time, with only a few exceptions. And people were projecting targets for FY13, 14, and 15. We realized that not all of the country offices have a good expectation of what they're actually going to be doing in FY14 and FY15. So we don't, excuse me. So we're giving all the country offices an opportunity next year and the year following to reset their targets for FY14 and FY15. One lesson that we learned when we were asking everyone to set targets, excuse me, it's early morning here, so I haven't quite cleared my throat yet. One lesson we learned was that country offices tended to be setting targets, understandably, in a very realistic way, basing them on the known business that they had, rather than prospectively expecting what new business that they would be winning, which wasn't exactly what I think everyone was hoping for, because we also wanted these to act as a projection for future business. So you might find that the instructions for target setting are going to change next year. But overall, it's really great to have these targets, especially for FY13. The other thing that we've done is synthesize the OPI data into a measuring PACS mission report. Sorry, guys. Which is going to be sent out relatively shortly by Matt Reeves. Okay. To broadcast across PACT the work that all of our projects and all of our partners have done in improving performance over the last several years. This graph you may have already seen because it's been sent out a lot, is a cross-section of PACT's OPI data from 2012, and you can see the promising results that partners that we've worked with for longer have higher OPI scores. Since I'm talking to Results and Measurement crowd, I know that you all know that there are some measurement issues with saying that partners we work with longer increase their scores over time uniformly. But we're hoping that as we get more year-on-year data across partners and across countries, we'll have more robust data to support our hypothesis that our capacity development approach improves organizational performance. All right, moving on to what we're going to be doing from here until the next reporting phase. Reporting for October 2013 is due October 15th. So that is pretty much the same deadline that we had last year. If you know in advance that you're going to have problems reporting by then, please let me know. It will help us plan better. I know it's not an easy deadline to reach, but the reason that we have the October 15th deadline is that the data from our end are due for the balanced scorecard on October 31st. So we're going to be spending all of that time aggregating, cleaning, and then confirming the data with all of you and the country offices. And between now and between the time that it's submitted and October 31st. Okay. This year we have some suggestions on how country offices should be confirming their data in country before it comes into DC. The first thing is to be sure to discuss the data with project technical officers and management before submission. I know that a lot of you have already been doing a great job of this, but we also had a few cases where there were some surprises or some discussion about back and forth about how accurate data were. So I think that we should consider it best practice to have a discussion within the country office before submitting the data into CRM so that everyone understands where the data come from and what the global indicator numbers are going to be for this year. Another best practice I'd like to encourage is to try logging into CRM before reporting time. Again, I know that some of you also use CRM for other uses, so you already are confident that your CRM account is working, but especially in country offices where it's the first time reporting for the global indicators, or offices where you have new M&E staff, it's really important to make sure that your credentials are fine and that you've got Internet Explorer working and that CRM isn't being blocked by your computer for some reason, so that we have lots of time to troubleshoot those issues before the due date. If you have any questions about any of this, process, definitions, IT support, feel free to email me. Reach out anytime. I'd much rather hear from you a lot way too early than one urgent thing at the absolute deadline. As with last year, after the data have all been submitted and confirmed with the M&E officers, we'll be sending it to country directors for final approval of the numbers before they're submitted to the COO's office for the balanced scorecard. Most of the time, again, we found that country directors are very responsive in looking at the numbers and either approving it or asking for clarification about issues. But again, I just want to emphasize that this is the time where we want clarifications and questions, and approval to happen, not after the report is already published. For the actual report itself, not just the numbers, the country summaries are going to be written in November. And then the country directors will be asked for any revisions or approval in December. So again, everyone will have an opportunity to look at the numbers again, as well as the way that their country's work is being described in the actual report. And that's going to happen in November and December, before the report is finally published at the end of December. Now I'd like to turn to looking at the indicator definitions in depth. We're going to go through them indicator by indicator. Starting with health, I talked to a lot of people who are on this webinar, and really almost all of the M&E folk who are associated with health projects this year, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time, having a conversation with me and Jen and Sarah Daster, because it helped us clarify a lot of issues, and now we have a lot of confidence because of that going into 2013 that we're going to get really good data. The health indicator is being slightly modified in the way that it's phrased this year. It's going to be phrased now, number of people with improved access to health and/or social services. This is not asking for a change in how people are actually reporting, but rather a clarification of the way the indicator is phrased, because we found that last year there was some confusion about whether or not OBC social services should be reported. To clarify, OBC social services should be reported this year, and I know that most of the country offices and projects were already doing so. So this shouldn't be a major change there. It also includes informational health services and referrals, which most projects are already counting. It also includes health education, which again, most projects were already counting, but we're putting these up for clarification because we did get some questions about these issues. Please make sure the data are deduplicated. I think that most projects have already been doing that, but it's an important issue, so it bears highlighting again. In terms of disaggregating by age and gender, I don't think that there have been too many questions about disaggregating by gender, but I want to clarify some things about disaggregating by age. As I think most of you know, there are two fields. There are three fields. One is over 18, which seems to be pretty straightforward. Then there's an under 18 field and an under 5 field. If you are collecting the data about children under 5 and know the difference between your children who are under 5 and who are between 5 and 18, please disaggregate it that way. And make sure that your under 18 data does not also include your under 15 number, because when we aggregate the data later, we're going to be totaling all of the numbers that you have entered. The reason that the under 18 number isn't phrased as 5 to 18 is because we know that some projects only collect data for under 18 and don't necessarily disaggregate it by under 5. So for those numbers, please go ahead and report it all in the under 18 box. If you have any questions about this disaggregation or you want to clarify some points about it to us, please feel free to reach out to me or to Jen and Sarah as well, and we'll help you figure out the best way to disaggregate your data by age. Also, please make sure to include your partner's work. This is mentioned in the protocol, but I wanted to highlight it because I think it's sometimes forgotten. Moving on to livelihoods. The livelihoods indicator is number of people with increased net income. We realize that this is not an easy indicator to measure in a literal way. For all of the usual reasons, we don't necessarily collect data on it. There is a lot of error in the answers that you get if you do ask about people's net income. So because of that, in the protocols that have been given out previously, there are some proxies suggested, and we'd like to expand that a little as well. So you'll see in the previous indicator protocols that it's acceptable to use assets as a proxy for increased income, and we're expanding it this year to also include increased savings. Some projects have already been reporting based on this anyway, and it's great that you're able to find these proxies and still report some information on our livelihoods work. Hopefully these will be easier to measure. Another thing that we've seen projects doing that seems like a good practice is to estimate the number of people with increased net income based on extrapolation for samples. So if you've had a study done of your population and determined that 40% of the people in the sample had increased income this year, you could extrapolate that to the entire population of livelihoods that you work with. The other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that even if you really feel that you have no way of measuring this at all, we would still like you to report on the livelihoods indicator so that we can get the total number of people that you work with. So even if you feel that you absolutely cannot in good conscience report a number for number of people with increased net income, go ahead and report 0 for that so that we can get the total number of people who are worked with in livelihoods programs. You'll see that on the indicator protocol and also in the CRM database as being one of the options for reporting. If you want support on figuring out how to measure this, please feel free to reach out either to me, to Hannah Poole, the Acting Livelihoods Director, or your Results and Measurement Advisor, and we'll help you figure out a strategy. The Natural Resource Management Indicator, number of hectares under improved community management, is pretty clear. The protocol has been updated a little just to tighten up the definitions and the language. One question we did get last year, because I think of some vague language in the indicator protocols, was whether or not you should be reporting hectares that you no longer work with. And we're asking you only to report on hectares that your project has actually worked with during the last fiscal year, which I think is pretty intuitive anyway. The other question that we got was surrounding whether you should be reporting how to report if multiple project codes or funders are supporting your NRM work. For now, just report it under one donor, and you can note somewhere there that it was supported by more than one donor, but just be sure not to duplicate the number of hectares when you're reporting. The Capacity Development Indicator, number of partners with improved performance. By now, everyone should know that the way that we ideally want this measured is by the Organizational Performance Index, or the OPI. It was really great last year to see projects taking initiative and without necessarily having had capacity development staff go down and support them in training how to use the tool, using especially the bronze method, in some cases also the gold method, to assess their partners. To review what the difference between these are, the gold method is the organization self-assesses the OPI during a PACT facilitated workshop, and then PACT staff verify the scores against evidence. The bronze method is that the PACT staff assess the organization based on their knowledge and available documents. Both of these options are totally fine. Obviously, there's a reason we call the gold method, because then the OPI itself can act as a capacity development activity. But for the purposes of data collection, the bronze method is also totally acceptable. Please just be sure to indicate which one you're using when you fill out the OPI data in CRM. It's also important for us to know what kind of organizations you're reporting on. I think that for the most part, they were done pretty clearly. But note that we've added two possible disaggregations this year. One is community committee, which we mean to be village development committees or ward development committees or PIAM development committees. Basically the informal organizations that act out of villages or very local areas. The other component of disaggregation that we're adding under type of organization are savings groups. We finally are trying to communicate very clearly this year that savings groups are an acceptable organization to report. And it's useful information for us to have to know the total number of savings groups that we work with. So even if you can't necessarily say with confidence that a saving group has improved since last year, we'd still like you to report it so that we can count up the total number of savings groups that we PACT-wide have. And then, as you know, there's a drop-down menu where you can say whether or not the organization improved, and you can select no there. So please, in addition to counting all of the traditional partners like NGOs that PACT works with, also count the more informal, smaller community organizations and the savings groups this year, because that's really important data for us to have. Okay. I know that for some countries it's going to be their first time implementing the OPI, so I wanted to point you towards a few resources to getting started on that. The OPI handbook is available on the PACT intranet, and the link here will get you there. The webinar recording from, I guess it was Matt who facilitated that webinar on the OPI, is also available on the intranet, and also on this slide is the link to that. Also, feel free to contact Matt, Olga, or Rachel about any issues with implementing the OPI that you're having, or other questions about how to report on whether or not organizations have improved. They're happy to give you either written guidance or to arrange a phone call with you. So all of this said, we realize that not all organizations are necessarily well measured using the OPI. Two new tools are in the process of being developed, although they're not ready for widespread use this year. There's a government performance index, which is intended for our government partners, which is currently being drafted. There's also a community performance index, which is for community committee partners like BDCs. And this year, Myanmar is piloting the CPI for us. And we'll hopefully have a lot of lessons learned that we can then use to scale up the CPI to other countries. So we realize that this doesn't help you this year in figuring out how to report on them. But again, please reach out and we'll help you come up with solutions on that. We've also had a lot of discussion surrounding the governance indicator this year. And I think that we weren't giving clear guidance in previous years on what exactly an initiative was. So the indicator protocols have been updated to reflect the conversations we've been having over the past year. Initiatives should be interpreted as broadly as you really can. So when initiatives take the form of specific events or meetings, each event or meeting should be counted individually. Sometimes initiatives aren't events, they're more like campaigns or they're ongoing monitoring. in that case, you do only want to count them once. So we realized that similar but independent, okay, so we realized that there's a difference in scope here. A long campaign being counted once might seem to discount it compared to a series of meetings that are all being counted individually. But again, we're going to be asking you to report them by type. So there's going to be a disaggregation that happens with the data, and you'll see how many of them are meetings versus advocacy events versus watchdog monitoring versus pets. So hopefully that will help us in better describing the overall scope of PAC's work and the overall reach of the governance work. We're also adding one type of disaggregation to the disaggregation by type, and that's advocacy events, which haven't been on there before. So please report the number of initiatives that fall into each category. If you see something on this list that is missing, something that you do that doesn't fall well into any one of these categories, please reach out to us before the deadline, before reporting begins in October, preferably. And if we think that it's something reasonable that might be captured across multiple projects, we can add that as a type of disaggregation. As I think some of you are already aware, Mark Cassidy has been working on an additional indicator that will be optional for this year that will better capture PAC's actual influence and outcomes of PAC's work. So the indicator, I'm sorry, I phrased it incorrectly in the slide. It should be number of policy changes influenced by PAC. So number of policy changes influenced by PAC is the indicator that's been added for this year. It's going to be optional but highly encouraged, and hopefully it's something that most projects are already aware of and won't be a major added reporting burden. Mark's going to be giving a webinar on the new indicator on August 6th, so please look out for the invitation. I hope that a lot of people who are involved with our governance projects will be able to attend and understand how it was come to and also give their feedback then. The business and markets indicator is staying the same and I think has mainly been clear, so the number of projects where business and markets have played a positive role. One question that we did get from several people last year was whether or not we should count projects that are funded by corporate donors like Chevron or Coca-Cola. So by projects where business and markets have played a positive role, we don't necessarily mean projects where activities were funded by corporations, but rather where project activities are oriented towards business and markets. In some cases, these are the same things, where Chevron funds a work project that promotes female entrepreneurship. However, sometimes they aren't exactly the same, such as when a corporation funds prevention of mother-to-child HIV transmission not using market forces. Obviously, this is one of our more subjective indicators, but if you think that you have a project where business and markets are a key and positive player in it, please count it. I'm going to turn now to how to enter data into the database this year. So if you are not doing the data entry and aren't interested in it, feel free to drop off. Although if there are any questions before I move into this about the global indicator definitions or the process or anything like that, please feel free to ask them while I'm turning over to Internet Explorer. So the basic interface of the database isn't really different this year. You still, when you come into CRM, you go to the global indicator reports on the side, and then you add a new one through this box in the corner. By the way, I'm also going to be sending out the updated written guidance so that people can follow step by step there as well. When you get into a new global indicator report, you choose your country from the list. So let's say Kenya. You'll note that the fiscal year is defaulting on 2012. So please choose the current fiscal year and make sure that the reporting period says October to September. Before you can add a new report, you need to save the report. Great. Okay. So notice that when I click in the middle of the health box, it becomes highlighted blue, and I now have the option up top to add a new health global indicator report. So we are still making some changes to the database. The name of project is going to be a lookup option this year. So you'll see that there is a drop-down menu that has all of the projects that have been happening in Kenya. But these have to be manually updated, and sometimes things slip through. So while it's not here now, later you're going to see a lookup box, which will hopefully be more thorough. So let's choose KCSSP. This should be pretty straightforward, but I just want to highlight that as I enter numbers into the boxes, you get a total number here, and this is the total of these three things. So this number is going to be the total number of males that are reported as having improved access to health or social service, and the same with this here. So as I enter numbers, the number in total females in this grayed out box, which we can't edit, increases. So make sure that the numbers in the total are corresponding with the total numbers that you have in your own data. Numbers 3 and 4 are what feed into the global indicator itself, number of people with improved access to health or social services. Number 5 and 6 are the total number of people who have been served. So sometimes people participate in our projects, but we can't really say that they've been given improved access to health or social services. So in some cases, we might expect this number to be a little bit bigger than the original one. But we would never expect it to be smaller because everyone who is counted in 3 and 4 should also be counted in 5 and 6. I'm not going to say that since it was big data. I also want to go over to the capacity development records. As I think everyone here knows, we report capacity development on a partner level rather than on a project level, which I know can be kind of time-consuming, but it gives us some really great data. Under number 1, you enter the name of the partner. We're also asking this year that everyone enter email addresses for their partners if they have them. The reason that we're asking this is because the capacity development team wants to use the email addresses to reach out to the partners and develop a pact-wide capacity development communication tool. I want to highlight also that number 3 here is going to change. We had a lot of people point out last year that some partners work some partners are worked with by PACT under multiple projects. So it could be that, for example, Partner X works with both KCSSP and through Peace 2. And in the past, we've gotten kind of a mix of reactions to this. Sometimes people will just enter one project and have done with. Sometimes people enter the same partner multiple times so that they can enter each project separately. What we're going to have available this year is a box where you can add multiple projects. So you only enter each partner once, and if it works with more than one project, you can add all of those projects there. You can also check more than one impact sector this year. If you are taking GIS coordinates, please enter the latitude and longitude. And then as you'll see, we've added these 2 new disaggregation types for type of partners. And then the rest pretty much looks as it did last year. There's a place down here for you to enter the OPI score if you've taken the OPI score. One last thing I want to show is that under the governance indicator, in addition to the area up here where you enter the required indicator, the number of positive initiatives, there's now space at the bottom, starting with number 8, to enter the optional indicator. So you'd enter both the optional indicator and the required indicator for a project under the same form, but since there aren't little red stars under 8 and then 9 and 10 where the disaggregation happens, you don't necessarily have to fill it out. Although, again, we encourage you to attend Mark's webinar and then also fill out the new indicator. All right, that's everything that I wanted to highlight in the database this year. And again, you'll be getting some more written guidance on how to go about filling it out and some of the changes that are happening. Again, in terms of CRM, the website address is here. It's pact.pactworld.org. It only works in Internet Explorer. If you can't log in, file a support ticket with IT at support.pactworld.org. And this year we're going to start archiving the global indicator resources on Jive, since hopefully it's going to be a little bit easier for everyone to access than the intranet. That's everything that I wanted to go over today. Are there any questions from anybody who's attending? Carrie.
Great, Jade, thank you so much for taking us through that this morning. This is Carrie. While people are typing their questions, let me just add a few comments. As Jade mentioned, there have been a few changes to the global indicators this year, but we are still continuing a process where we're developing the indicators over time. And we have been working with some of you to think through how we might better measure ourselves over time. So specifically in the governance area, livelihoods, health, and business and markets, we are continuing to think about what might be a better indicator that might more holistically measure what it is that PACT does over time. One of the really exciting things about the global indicators this year for me is this is the 3rd year that we will have data. So we actually are starting to develop a longitudinal look at our programming over time. And this, I think, is really important and really unique among international NGOs. And so it's the reason we're keeping some of the less palatable global indicators over time before we change so that we can have this longitudinal look. We are planning probably the biggest shifts in indicators may come in the next year or certainly by year 5 where we will have much more substantial longitudinal data over time. I say this is unique among international NGOs. There are only a few of us that do this and try and measure our approach as opposed to measuring our project-by-project work. So thank you all for participating in this process. It's so unique or so unusual that in 2011, I think, or 12, I can't remember now, I think it was 12, there was actually an Interaction presentation about this measurement, longitudinal or global measurement of INGO work at the Interaction Forum. And there's actually another presentation next week here in Washington that I'll be doing at Interaction with a few other agencies that are doing this kind of longitudinal measurement. So, you know, it may feel tedious wherever you are, but it actually feeds into something that's very important for PACT. So I appreciate your work. The other thing I wanted to to talk about a little bit was a couple of pieces that we're working on to provide depth to the global indicators. The first is around the OPI. Many of you participated in the reliability testing of the OPI that happened last year, which we now have the results for. But the big thing that we're planning this coming year is to work on a validity testing piece for the OPI, and that's going to be coming up in the next few months. And so just to remind ourselves, reliability looks at how you're measuring what you're measuring. Sorry, validity looks at if you're measuring what you say you're measuring. So if we say we're measuring resources, are the questions we're asking really valid for asking around resources? And the validity test or the reliability testing is already completed. So you'll see that coming up in the next, I'd say, few months. It's going to be happening fairly quickly now. And the other thing that the results and measurement team are working on in detail and trying to get ready for the budgeting process right now is a longitudinal study on capacity development impact, and truly an impact study with all of the pieces that an impact study includes, such as very difficult things like control groups and continued measurements over time and a specific cohort of people that we enroll. So you should be hearing more about that over time. Of course, we all know that these indicators don't really move us towards impact, although they may indicate some impact longitudinally. So we do want to supplement our kind of more routine measures with more in-depth studies of our work. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Are there any other questions or comments about anything here? Well, I'm not seeing anything else. I know that a lot of you have already been through this process before, and I've already spoken to a lot of you this year about some of the issues here. If you do have any other questions, or you're somebody who's listening to this recording later and you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, we're very appreciative of the hard work that everyone goes through in getting the global indicators together. And we're looking forward to a smooth process this year with all of your help. So thanks, and have a good day, everyone.